So we're like, we've built the business on this assumption, and now we're realizing that it was just because there was the right market cycle, and in the wrong market cycle, we're going to get screwed if we continue down this path. We were two 23-year-olds that, had an ambition, a dream, and had no idea what the hell they were doing. This is not for everybody. And if you are successful, yes, you have a big upside at the end of it. But the journey that you need to go through is quite intense.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael, founder of Empath and Sales for Founders podcast, and very happy to have you with us today. Today, we have a great story on perseverance from one of FinTech's leading founders who has actually been at it for about 8 years or so. And his story is around endurance and really trying to figure things out as he kind of got going and now is about to start scaling. So without further ado, happy to turn over to you, Slava from Finverity.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me. Appreciate the time and looking forward to the conversation.
So on this podcast, right, for anyone that's been listening in, we tend to cover a lot of different stories from founders in this space. And some founders have been really heavy in AI. Some founders have been, starting as interns and have actually scaled to C-level and so on and so forth. Reason I'm very excited to have you today is because your story is also quite unique. And I think you have a story where you have been in this space for, 8 years, if I got that number correctly. And over these 8 years, you really had to come up in an industry that is, taken over by competition, really overwhelmed by, playbooks and trying to figure it out. So I thought to kick this kind of off, right, maybe you could just give an introduction to what Finverity does, just so everyone knows a bit there. And then we'll go into our first topic, which is around how do you actually build without a playbook from the very beginning?
So you're right. Me and my partner, we started Finverity almost 9 years ago now. And what Finverity does effectively is to try to digitize the supply chain finance space and to make it more efficient. What is supply chain finance for people who don't know what it is? It's any kind of financial product filling in a working capital gap in a supply chain, right? A very simple example for those from the UK, for example, you're a small farmer selling apples to Waitrose, a supermarket, right? Typically, those guys don't pay you immediately. They will pay you in 60, 90, 120 days. That is a big problem for a small business because your working capital, your cash is tied in these payment terms, right? You have to wait 120 days before you get paid, before you can pay your staff, buy more stock, do the whole thing, right? And in this relationship, you don't have any power because you are a small supplier to a large company, right? So it's not like you can enforce them to pay you earlier. And that's also one of the reasons, now when the UK government is enforcing 60-day payment terms because of how big of an issue that is. But that's where these products, supply chain finance and working capital products come in. So you can effectively sell your invoice to Waitrose, in my example, to a platform like us or a bank who will come in and finance that invoice, give you money immediately with a discount. So 97 cents on the dollar, for example, and collect the full 100 at the maturity in 120 days. Now imagine this, but at massive scale and cross-border, with the farmer being in Peru and supplying avocado and, a textile manufacturer being in Asia and providing garments. So the global supply chain is incredibly interconnected, and 80% of any kind of trade has a finance angle attached to it. So there's a wider trade, supply chain finance sits under a wider trade finance umbrella. And it's critical for the global economy. Basically, without these funding flows, the economy doesn't function. It's like blood for the economy, for goods to flow. So what we do is we build a technology platform to digitize that whole journey and to automate it. And we sell it as a white label SaaS tool to banks, as a bank infrastructure play, so that they can digitize how they offer these products and therefore reduce barrier to entry for small businesses to be able to access it as well, because the whole process becomes more efficient and cost effective. As well as on top of that, we built effectively a marketplace where we ourselves provide alternative working capital solutions to small businesses, predominantly on cross-border basis, having different banks and funds at the back, actually providing the balance sheet and us acting as a marketplace and effectively a matchmaker in the middle. So that's a summary.
Slava, just to kind of kick it off, right? That's a super complex offering. So you've got lots of people that you could potentially be selling to. You've got lots of actors in that ICP and buyers and personas, right? So maybe you could tell me just a little bit about in the beginning, think about 8 years ago when you kind of got started. How did you begin, these prospecting, selling, working with different, prospects in this category? Because I could imagine in the beginning it may have been a bit difficult to select, right?
Absolutely. It's a super complicated ecosystem, right? With multiple players, cross border components, and so on and so forth. And when we started, we were also clueless. We were two 23-year-olds that, had an ambition, a dream, and had no idea what the hell they were doing. So it took quite a while to figure things out, but we stuck with it, right? And as we started, going deeper into the industry, speaking to people, understanding where the pain points are, there is this thing called the trade finance gap, which is a few trillion. It sounds big and massive, and all of people in the industry talk about it, but what can you actually practically do to resolve it? So we started step by step pinpointing where exactly the problem is and how can we try to resolve it. Being two 23-year-olds without networks or our own cash, we couldn't raise a massive amount of money and just start lending ourselves to be able to tackle it. So what could we do though? We could build tech to make the whole process a lot more efficient. So we had to look, where our strengths, what can we offer to the market. So we thought, let us start with the technology piece and make it really good and enable the whole process to work more seamlessly. And then where can we sell it? Who can we sell it to? Who would buy from us? Initially, we were not good enough to be able to sell to banks realistically. The platform was just not secure enough. It was not deep enough in terms of features, so on and so forth. So we had to start somewhere. So we went to non-banking financial institutions, effectively small factoring firms and funds, to be able to sell it and to get market feedback and to iterate. And we focused on the emerging markets because A, that's where most of the trade finance gap sits, and B, those economies are heavily reliant on trade, right? Unlike the UK or some of the other economies, it's not a service economy, it's a trade-based economy. Therefore, the banks there make majority of their money through transaction banking, not investment banking, advising on IPOs, actually financing physical trade, right? So that's where the need is the highest, therefore, was the assumption, and that was, the case. And so we started selling to these NBFIs, learning in the process, iterating, and then realizing at some point, actually, that's not a great ICP. But I can go into that, if you want, or we can explore something else.
Yeah, no, that's a really good shout because a lot of the founders that I work with or have talked to, right, they realize in the beginning that actually they were going towards an ICP X and the conviction that they need to bring to the table just isn't there because of the market needing more attention, maybe more proof points, maybe more use cases, or the sales cycle is maybe a bit too long, right? So actually, maybe coming on to that point for a second, it would be really good to kind of talk a little bit about when did you take that decision to actually start pivoting? And to give some context, a lot of founders I experience or have worked with maybe wait a little too long, or sometimes they don't want to acknowledge that the initial ICP they had been going after maybe set them back a few months, which can happen, right? So if there's anything in that world that you want to share around, how you have figured that out, how did you as a founder take that really hard decision to, realize that? And then where did you actually go from there?
It's a very good point that we've done all of those mistakes. All right. Waiting too long, trying too hard to be right instead of actually listening to the market and doing all of that. What happened in our case, right? So we started selling to these guys. They started liking the product. We started building up revenue up to a certain level. Thankfully, back then, it was a good venture cycle. We were, prior to some of the economic instability that has happened afterwards. So we just raised quite a bit of cash. We raised our seed round of about 5 million at that moment. So we had cash in the bank, right? But then the economic cycle started to turn with COVID and everything. The economy started slowing down, businesses started getting squeezed and defaulted. And because our customers were funds with not very strong balance sheets and which are playing in, smaller business lending space, their customers started defaulting and they're starting getting the squeeze. And therefore they're starting either paying us with a delay or not paying us at all. So we're like, fuck. we've built the business on this assumption, and now we're realizing that that was just because there was the right market cycle, and in the wrong market cycle, we're going to get screwed if we continue down this path, which was a difficult acknowledgement, as you said, right? It's not easy to pivot, especially once you've already built certain amount of revenue on it, and you basically need to say no to it and go in a completely different direction. What we had done that, we realized that we need to go after banks, because at the end of the day, they still funnel about 80% of liquidity in this space. They have strong balance sheets. They're going to be there forever, realistically, and they're not going to have problems paying us. But they have much higher requirements than the funds. So what do we do? And they also have much longer sales cycles, which is painful, but it is part of the process, right? So what we did, we said, let's go and do this bet. We reinvested a lot of money into rebuilding the technology. Luckily, as I said, we just raised the money, so we had the time, and started aggressively going after banks, right? And typically, in this space, it is a lot about survival and being in the industry for long enough, because banks and financial institutions are generally quite risk averse. And so they want some of their friends to have bought it, right? Some of the other logos to have used the technology before they are the first to go for it. So as we were investing into rebuilding the whole platform, we have, our platform is called Finverity OS, operating system, or one system, and we called it FOS 2.0, sorry. So that took almost a year, if not a year and a half, to actually rebuild, because again, of how complicated this whole space is, plus AI was not yet there. So it really took a long time, but at the same time, realistically, bank cycles took the same amount of time. So typically a bank sales cycle is 18 to 12 months. So what we started, while we were rebuilding it in the back, we started going to the banks and started selling it, and we got our first two logos, effectively, one in Netherlands, one in Kenya, in Africa. And at the same time, we did another bet, which is the marketplace offering, right? Because the corporate sales cycles are shorter. So while we figure this thing out, we can start generating some revenue here. So these were the two bets that we made. Basically, go after the banking ICP for the platform and start generating some revenues through effectively lending enablement, both of which have started to pay off over time, right? Then we got our first logos. With those first logos and upgrade of the system, we started getting feedback. We got SOC 2 compliance, all of the necessary things. And then we started building on that. And now we have some of the largest banks in Middle East and Africa on our platform. Literally the largest bank in Middle East by assets, Qatar National Bank, and two of the four largest banks in Africa, ABSA and RMB groups, which are on the platform, and many others. But it's an iterative cycle, and it is exacerbated by the fact of how slow this industry is and how slow everything moves, right? So you need to wait quite a bit longer for your bets to get a feedback loop, whether your bets are correct or not. And that is not easy, emotionally, cash flow wise, and otherwise.
I was just going to say, Slava, as you were saying this, you have to be honest, you make it sound so easy to just, do these like step-by-step things. It's incredible to hear a founder, really talk that clearly about it, because one of the things that I was picking up as you were speaking is you really inadvertently did the right exact thing by defining your own beachhead strategy. You went to the ICP that you knew you'd have a higher chance of converting and convincing. And yes, even though the pain of that sales cycle was probably longer or difficult to capture, you knew that at the end of this, you'd be better off having a longer sales cycle than having to be set back and something like that. So that's incredible. And again, you made it sound really easy. So it's on to my next kind of topic. That all speaks about endurance. And that all speaks about, as a founder, you have to carry a business now from one to another focus. Product has to go from one to another focus, maybe. You have to kind of carry yourself emotionally, having got that 5 million, initial funds, and now having to think about what do we have to do with this. So maybe a lot of people listening in right now might actually be founders or chief of staffs working with founders or people kind of in that close to founder world. How did you handle the endurance? What's something that really helped you kind of get through that period overall, or for anyone really to take away as a tip?
I would say probably three things. Number one, try not to do it alone if you can, right? So having a co-founder or anybody in your life for that matter, your wife or partner, right? People close to you who can see and understand the journey is really helpful, right? With a co-founder, you are going through the same shit, right? So obviously when things go wrong, a lot of people also break in that process. But if you can get through it, it actually just becomes stronger and you can kind of share the journey with them, right? Delegate some of the responsibilities, split them between yourself. It makes it easier, right? So that would be my number one. Number two is do some form of spiritual practice, whether it's meditation, plant medicine, whatever floats your boat, going to raves, unless you want to, you either, my personal opinion is people who are entrepreneurs, they either become alcoholics, workaholics, holics, something, or they become spiritual at some level, right? Even if they don't call it spirituality, they become self-aware, right, of their inner journey, because these are the only ways you can manage the level of stress. Either you face it and you transform it, or you avoid it through work, drinking, or whatever else. Yeah, so for me it was practicing a lot, going deep into yoga, into meditation, and all of that stuff, right? And that's a very big part of my life now, and a big part of me. And that helps you work through that, through those emotions that are difficult when things are not going in the right direction, when you don't know whether what you're doing will make any sense, and there will be any outcome at the end of it. It's not an easy thing. There's a very good saying, I don't remember who said it, but it was an entrepreneur at a graduation ceremony, and they asked him what are the best studies to be like, what is best to study to become an entrepreneur, and he said religious studies, because you need to have the level of faith in order to go through all of the shit, for the lack of better terminology, to be able to still believe in your vision, believe in yourself, despite everything outside screaming you're wrong, right? And inside at times. So yeah, I would say basically, yeah, having good people around you, having some form of spiritual practice or introspective practice, and just building the faith in yourself, in your vision, and into something greater than yourself, ideally as well.
Yeah. Slava, I personally love that more than you could imagine. So I've practiced yoga for probably 15-ish years now, actually. And this is a big part of how I also keep myself sane when trying to, build something out, or ground myself when a hard decision has to be taken, so you can see it that way. And I really love that you have that as an element, because I think a lot of founders have this, at least the ones I've talked to, right? Have this, we have to be aggressive, we have to go, you can never be vulnerable, you can never be perceived as, not able to be in touch with things that you need to be in touch with. And I think you're completely right. Every single person needs to have a guiding principle, and spirituality is a perfect element of how you can have a guiding principle that allows you to stay on track, which is why, you've been able to build an amazing company in 8 years, tackling a really difficult market, and staying, to the point where now you're transitioning from, kind of that survival mode, and now you're, transitioning, going into this scale mode now, effectively. So coming on to kind of maybe that topic and so on, right? What's some of the things that are going to change now that you're going away from this kind of survival mode that you've, painted in the beginning and so on, and now you're going into real, scale mode, where you've got the proof points, you've got the credibility, you've got the base that you need to, as a founder, to work off of. What's this transition look like for you guys, and what's important there?
Yeah, I think it's an important question, and the honest answer, we're still figuring it out as we go along. But fundamentally, the difference is, I like to illustrate it, is when you're at early stages, you're like in a lab, right? You're experimenting. So you're testing things out, you're experimenting, seeing what lands. Like it's like a science project, but obviously within the commercial world. And then as you start scaling, it transitions less from experimentation, although you also need to keep that and new bets and trying new things. But for your core business that is working already, this is now about organizational design, and it's more about designing the system, the organizational system, so that it can scale to allow you to deliver everything that you need to deliver efficiently, right, without breaking. So it's thinking about who are the right people that you need in the right places, what are some of the people that are no longer a fit for, the new stage. How can I map out the whole delivery process, right? From marketing to sales to delivery, so on, upsell and so on and so forth. And basically, where do I have holes in that whole journey, and who do I need to bring in to fill those holes? And at the same time, doing that not too fast, or at least in our case, because we don't want to be burning a lot of money again, right? We're in profitability mode and we want to keep it that way. How do I do that without overextending myself, right, massively? And I get that balance right between preempting some of the issues as they come along as you scale, while not overly extending myself.
What I'd love to just go a little bit deeper in, if it's possible, and I'll kind of give you some context preference, right? You mentioned a really important word. You said that you don't want to burn a bunch of cash or capital. You're profitable, which is incredible, right? And that's the goal
Almost.
for almost profitable. Excuse me, almost profitable. We'll make sure of that. But that's even having the path to profitability in line is just incredible, right? So one of the things I'm seeing a lot now is the playbook has changed. It's no longer the massive team, massive acquisition costs. It's actually now, like you described, a founder can paint the journey of a customer and can look where to best optimize that. Some people are going down the world of AI. Some people are, maximizing their existing teams and making things more efficient. Is there anything kind of in that world that maybe you're doing to, capture quite a difficult market that's competitive, but maintain what you have, or scale and optimize accordingly?
Yeah, look, so I think these are different strategies, right? Depending on you also as a founder, one of the things I learned, you need to understand the market cycles, the wider market cycles, right? Because it inevitably impacts your business and your life in general, how you do your personal investments and, where you choose to live and all other things. So when we were starting the company, right, there was this upwards trajectory market cycle and the economy was still more productive. Right now, we're in a massively unproductive economy. Like we're very far down the cycle. And yes, there is an AI, let's say, bubble. You can interpret bubble in whatever way you want. And I'm not saying the technology, wrong technology is actually amazing, but fundamentally the business models still have not been proven. And there is a lot of money going into it without understanding what will come out on the other side. But in any case, that's a topic for another day. What you as a founder have a choice effectively. You can either use AI in your business, as you said, to make yourself more efficient, maybe add in additional bets on top of your core business using AI, which are some of the things that we're doing, both of those things. Or you can, try to chase the gold, and go after a fully AI company, try to become new Cursor and so on and so forth. And I don't think there is a right or wrong decision there. It's just if you want to run the VC model of hyper scaling, like 85% of VC capital is going into AI right now. So you need to strap up for that kind of ride, and you need to understand what you're getting yourself into, which a lot of first-time founders don't understand. And when I was a first-time founder, I felt it was very unfair. Why do second-time founders raise money so much easier? I now completely get it, right? Like if I was a VC or investor, I would also bet a lot more on a second-time founder because they understand what they're getting themselves into. Or an alternative path, you can, build a sustainable, profitable business, which is still growing at good rates, much larger than, your average business, non-digital, non-tech business. But that is likely not a fit for a typical VC model. It is a better fit for growth equity or strategic investors and so on and so forth. So you get to decide. Both are the decisions that are valid, and you never know what we will decide in the long term, right? But for now, in the short term, the decision is to build a profitable, scalable business. Our business is also, it took a while to ramp up, but once our revenues are there, they're super sticky, and our cost base doesn't decrease nearly as proportionate as the revenue. So the business is going to be highly, highly cash flow generating, like within a year or two. And then you have a lot of options, right? You can do whatever you want. You are then choosing your own destiny. So that is the strategy that I think is also better aligned with the current market, unless you're building a super hyperscaling AI company, which is like a different world altogether. If you just want to be, a software business or tech enabled business, you need to build with that model in mind for the current market in order to have best possible outcomes and most choice you can possibly have for exits, fundraising, strategic partnerships, so on and so forth.
That's great. I think it's nice to paint those, two pictures, because I think you're right. Sometimes people forget there isn't always the VC-backed hypergrowth, model that has to exist. There's many other models of growth that can actually exist as a founder begins. I love that point about the second founder. Sometimes, though, I find it interesting, right? Because second-time founders, they look great to VCs. When they get in the seat, they try to build the same playbook as before, and they realize oftentimes it actually hurts more than helps sometimes. So I personally, from a go-to-market commercial perspective, I love working with first-time founders because they're just a lot more open to doing the right thing based on current markets, as opposed to coming with a, playbook to put in. Again, that could be a whole different episode that you and I have at a later stage. Coming on to the very last question, because we've only got a few more minutes left to finish this out. But one of the things around, the headlines of a founder that don't really get published, meaning what about the life of a founder just, should be a headline, but never quite is, that you feel is something that really the world should know? I mean, we hear all the time about, fundraise announcements, scaling announcements, customer win announcements. We hear about exits and IPOs, and those typically are when founders get in the news. But what other missing headlines should really be there for, any founder that deserves that?
I think people need to know what the hell they're getting themselves into, right? And I don't think enough people talk about it authentically, right? This is not for everybody. This journey is, very much glamorized to the external world. And if you are successful, yes, you have a big upside at the end of it. But the journey that you need to go through is quite intense, right? And some people have a lighter version of it, some have a super heavy one, and some have something in the middle, right? Everyone's journey is unique. But effectively, I think more people need to talk about authentically about what it takes, right? And one of the things that it takes is to constantly face your own shit, as I call it. Constantly be able to question yourself and, put your ego aside. Am I right? Am I acting right now from, just my identity being attached to this thing being successful in this current form, and therefore I'm not listening to the market? Or am I taking my anger out on my wife because my business is not doing well in this moment in time? Or the other way around, when things are going well, am I becoming arrogant and I'm starting to have blind spots about things which are not working anymore, but because they worked before, I'm not looking at that? And many, many things like that. This is where I think your internal practice helps a lot, and be that meditation, yoga, whatever it is you do. But it's important not just to chase things and do hustle. Yeah, that part is a given, right? Like, you need to obviously work hard, you need to go after the things that you want, but it's also important to pause, look inside, and be honest with yourself. Where am I at right now, and what can I do so that I can put myself in the best possible position to make the right calls for the company and for myself as well? So I think that's an important aspect which is kind of starting to arise more into the surface, but is still not talked about enough.
I agree. I can see a lot more different things like retreats for founders popping up. I can see a lot more holistic and kind of wellness going into that world. So I really genuinely hope that happens, because I do believe that's more important for anything. Slava, listen, thank you so much. It was a really great conversation. I think we had a lot of great topics that came out. Thank you everyone for listening in. We'll have another one of these coming out in about a few weeks' time, and appreciate your time. Take care.